In the most restrictive prisons in the United States, a single door defines the limits of a human life. Behind it, movement is measured. Time is regulated. Contact is reduced to procedure. Facilities classified as supermaximum security, or supermax, were developed to hold individuals considered the highest security risks within the federal and state prison systems. These include people convicted of high-profile violent crimes, individuals who have committed serious offenses while incarcerated, or those identified by authorities as posing ongoing threats to institutional safety. Inside these units, the standard practice is solitary confinement. In the federal system, the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, commonly known as ADX Florence, has been the most documented example. According to Bureau of Prisons records and multiple federal court filings, individuals housed there typically spend 22 to 24 hours a day alone in a single cell. The dimensions of these cells are consistent. Concrete walls. A poured concrete bed. A combined sink and toilet made of stainless steel. Fixtures designed to prevent dismantling. Windows, if present, are narrow and positioned to limit visibility of the outside environment. Human interaction is controlled and minimal. Meals are delivered through a slot in the door. Communication with staff occurs through that same barrier. Physical contact is avoided except during necessary procedures, such as medical evaluations or transfers, and even then, it is tightly managed. Recreation, when permitted, usually takes place in a separate enclosure. Court records and inspection reports describe these spaces as small, secure areas, sometimes referred to as recreation cages. Individuals are escorted there alone, often in restraints. The time allotted varies but is typically limited to 1 hour per day and in some cases less. The purpose of this level of confinement is administrative and preventive. Correctional authorities have stated in official documents that supermax conditions are intended to maintain safety and order within the broader prison system. By isolating individuals assessed as highly dangerous, the system seeks to reduce violence, prevent organized activity, and limit the capacity for harm. But the conditions themselves have been the subject of sustained scrutiny. Over the past several decades, academic research, psychiatric evaluations, and legal challenges have examined the effects of prolonged isolation on human cognition and mental health. Findings presented in court proceedings and peer-reviewed studies have consistently documented a range of psychological impacts associated with extended solitary confinement. These include difficulties with concentration, disturbances in sleep patterns, heightened anxiety, and in some cases the onset or worsening of psychiatric conditions. In a 2012 class action lawsuit filed against the Federal Bureau of Prisons, plaintiffs alleged that the conditions at ADX Florence caused significant psychological harm, particularly for individuals with pre-existing mental health conditions. The case, Cunningham v. Federal Bureau of Prisons, included expert testimony from psychiatrists and correctional experts. While the Bureau of Prisons did not admit wrongdoing, the case resulted in a settlement that required certain reforms, including improved mental health screening and treatment protocols. Even with such measures, the structure of confinement remains fundamentally unchanged. Isolation is still the defining feature. Time inside these units is not experienced in the same way as in the outside world. There are no communal activities, no shared meals, no unstructured social interaction. Days are divided by routine, meals, counts, limited movement, and long periods of stillness. The absence of external stimuli is deliberate. Cells are designed to reduce sensory input. Sound is minimal. Visual variation is limited. The environment does not change from one day to the next. For some individuals, this predictability becomes a form of stability. For others, documented accounts suggest it can lead to disorientation. Formerly incarcerated individuals, in sworn statements and recorded interviews, have described the experience of losing track of time, of difficulty maintaining a sense of sequence between days, and of heightened awareness of small, repetitive details within the cell. These accounts have been corroborated in part by clinical observations. Psychologists studying the effects of isolation have noted that the human brain relies on environmental variation and social interaction to maintain orientation and cognitive function. When those inputs are significantly reduced, measurable changes can occur. This is not a theoretical concern. It has been raised repeatedly in legal challenges, policy debates, and oversight reports. In 2015, the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, known as the Nelson Mandela Rules, defined prolonged solitary confinement as confinement for more than 15 consecutive days. The rules state that such conditions should be prohibited when they amount to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. The United States has not adopted these rules as binding law, but they are frequently referenced in discussions about correctional policy and human rights. Within the U.S. system, the use of solitary confinement varies by jurisdiction. Some states have implemented reforms to limit its duration or expand oversight. Others continue to rely on it as a primary management tool for certain populations. The individuals housed in these conditions often include those convicted of crimes that have drawn national attention. Cases involving acts of extreme violence, acts that have resulted in multiple casualties, or incidents that have fundamentally disrupted public safety. The classification process that places someone in a supermax unit is administrative, but it is influenced by the nature of the offense, behavior in custody, and assessments conducted by correctional authorities. Once assigned, movement out of these units can be limited. Progression typically requires sustained compliance with institutional rules over extended periods. Reviews are conducted, but the criteria for transfer can be stringent. For some, the duration of confinement in isolation extends for years. In certain documented cases, individuals have spent more than a decade under these conditions. The door remains closed. It opens for specific reasons at specific times, under controlled circumstances. Otherwise it stays shut. From the outside, the structure appears stable. Order is maintained. Incidents are reduced. The system functions as designed. From the inside, the experience is defined by restriction. A fixed space. A controlled schedule. A limited range of human contact. This is the environment in which some of the most serious criminal cases in the United States eventually come to rest. Not at the moment of arrest. Not during trial. But here. Before an individual is placed inside a supermax unit, there is a process. It is structured, documented, and administrative. In the federal system, classification begins shortly after sentencing. Individuals enter the custody of the Bureau of Prisons and are first designated to a facility based on a range of factors. These include the severity of the offense, length of sentence, criminal history, and any known institutional behavior. The initial designation does not typically place someone directly into the most restrictive conditions. Movement into a supermax environment usually follows further review. This review is conducted through internal classification procedures. Records are examined. Behavioral reports are compiled. Intelligence gathered within the prison system may be included. The process is not public, but its framework has been outlined in court filings and policy documents. One of the central tools used in federal classification is the Security Threat Group designation. This refers to individuals identified by correctional authorities as affiliated with organized groups that may operate within prison systems. These groups can include gangs or other coordinated networks. Designation is based on documented criteria. This may include prior convictions, communication records, or observed behavior while in custody. The classification carries implications for housing, monitoring, and movement within the system. In addition to group affiliation, individual conduct plays a significant role. Incidents involving violence, possession of contraband, or attempts to disrupt institutional order are recorded in disciplinary files. These records are reviewed when determining whether an individual requires more restrictive housing. Transfer to a supermax facility such as ADX Florence is not automatic. According to Bureau of Prisons policies, it requires a referral and approval process. A case is assembled, including documentation of the individual's history, conduct, and perceived risk level. This case is reviewed by a designated committee. The committee evaluates whether the individual meets the criteria for placement in the administrative maximum environment. The stated objective is to ensure that only those who require the highest level of control are assigned to that setting. The individual may be notified of the referral. In some documented cases, individuals have been given the opportunity to respond in writing. However, legal challenges have argued that this process offers limited ability to contest the placement effectively. In Wilkinson v. Austin, a 2005 United States Supreme Court case concerning Ohio's supermax facility, the court examined due process and classification decisions. The ruling acknowledged that placement in highly restrictive conditions imposes an atypical and significant hardship, and therefore requires certain procedural protections. These protections include notice of the reasons for placement and an opportunity to present objections. However, the court also held that the procedures need not match those of a criminal trial. The balance, as defined by the ruling, is between institutional security and individual rights. Once approved, the transfer is scheduled. The movement itself is conducted under strict security protocols. Individuals are transported in restraints, often with multiple officers present. Routes and timing are controlled to minimize exposure to other inmates and the public. Upon arrival at a supermax facility, the intake process continues. Medical evaluations are conducted. Mental health screenings are performed. Property is inventoried and restricted according to institutional rules. The individual is then assigned to a specific housing unit. At ADX Florence, for example, there are multiple units with varying levels of restriction. Placement within these units is determined by further assessment of behavior and risk. The most restrictive units are designed for near-total isolation. Other units may allow for limited interaction under controlled conditions. Progression between units is possible, but it is not guaranteed. According to Bureau of Prisons documentation, advancement depends on sustained compliance with institutional rules over time. Reviews are conducted periodically, but the criteria for movement remain tightly defined. The classification process does not end with initial placement. It is ongoing. Behavior is continuously monitored. Reports are generated. Decisions are revisited. For some individuals, this results in gradual movement to less restrictive environments. For others, the classification remains unchanged. Legal records show that challenges to classification decisions are not uncommon. Individuals have filed grievances within the prison system and lawsuits in federal courts, arguing that their placement is unjustified or excessively prolonged. Outcomes vary. In some cases, courts have required additional review or modifications to procedures. In others, the decisions of correctional authorities have been upheld. The system is designed to prioritize control. Each step is documented. Each decision is recorded. From the perspective of the institution, classification is a tool. It is used to manage populations, reduce risk, and maintain order across facilities that house tens of thousands of individuals. From the perspective of the individual, classification defines daily life. It determines where a person is held, how they move, and the extent of their contact with others. It establishes the conditions under which time will pass. The process is procedural. There are forms, committees, and reviews. There are criteria and thresholds. There is no single moment that defines it. Instead, it unfolds through a series of decisions, each one narrowing the range of possible outcomes. At the end of that process, there is a placement, a specific cell, a specific unit, a specific level of restriction. And once assigned, the individual enters an environment where change, if it comes, does so slowly. Measured not in days or weeks but often in years. The documentation continues. Reports are filed. Reviews are scheduled. The system remains active. But the setting does not. The walls are fixed. The door is fixed. And the classification, once applied, becomes the framework through which everything else is experienced. Inside a supermax unit, each day follows a structure that does not vary. Time is divided into segments. Each segment is defined by institutional procedure. There are no clocks inside many of these cells. Time is understood through repetition. The first indication of the day often comes through sound. Footsteps in the corridor. The movement of a cart. The metallic shift of a lock engaging. Meals are delivered at consistent intervals. According to Bureau of Prisons operational descriptions, food is passed through a secure slot in the door. The slot opens briefly, just enough to allow a tray to enter, then closes immediately. There is no direct contact. The exchange is silent in most cases. Nutritional standards are regulated. Menus are designed centrally and distributed across facilities. Individuals do not choose their meals beyond limited accommodations for medical or religious requirements, which must be formally approved. After the tray is collected, the cell returns to stillness. Movement inside the space is unrestricted but limited by the dimensions of the room. Most cells measure approximately 7 by 12 feet. Within that space, all daily activity takes place. Sleeping, eating, reading, exercising. Each function occurs within arm's reach of the others. There is no change in environment. No variation in layout. No shift in setting. Correctional staff conduct regular counts. These are scheduled and recorded. During a count, officers visually confirm the presence and status of each individual. This may occur multiple times throughout the day and night. The process is standardized. Lights may remain on during counts. Sleep is interrupted. The schedule does not adjust. Hygiene is managed within the cell. The sink provides running water. Showers are not located inside the cell in many supermax units. Instead, individuals are escorted, one at a time, to a separate shower area. This movement is controlled. According to documented procedures, restraints are applied before the cell door is opened. Hands are secured, often behind the back, and the individual is accompanied by correctional staff at all times. The duration of the shower is limited. Once completed, the individual is returned to the cell. The door closes again. Recreation follows a similar pattern. If permitted, it occurs outside the cell but within a confined enclosure. These areas are described in official records as secure, individual spaces, often surrounded by high walls or fencing, with limited visibility beyond. The time allowed is typically 1 hour per day. In some cases less. Weather does not always alter the schedule. The process of movement remains the same. Restraints, escort, isolation, return. Throughout the day there are no group activities, no shared spaces, no unstructured interaction. Communication with other individuals in custody is not part of the routine. Some individuals attempt to communicate indirectly, tapping on walls, speaking through vents. These methods are inconsistent and often discouraged by institutional rules. Mail is one of the few external connections. Incoming and outgoing correspondence is subject to inspection. Delays are common. Access to reading materials is regulated. Books and legal documents may be permitted, but they are screened and limited in number. Television is available in some units, depending on classification level. Programming is restricted. Channels are selected by the institution. In units where televisions are not present, there is no broadcast access. Silence becomes a consistent feature. Not absolute silence but controlled. Mechanical sounds. Distant movement. Occasional voices from staff. The absence of variation is part of the structure. There are no unexpected events. No spontaneous changes. The routine is designed to be predictable. From an administrative perspective, this predictability supports control. It reduces uncertainty. It standardizes operations. From the perspective of the individual, the effect is cumulative. Days are not distinguished by events. They are marked by the same sequence. Mill, count, limited movement, return. The cycle repeats. Sleep does not always follow a fixed pattern. Lighting conditions vary by facility, but in many cases, illumination is constant or only partially reduced at night. This can affect circadian rhythms. Sleep may occur in shorter intervals. Interruptions are expected. Medical care is provided within the constraints of the environment. Routine checks are conducted. Requests for care are submitted through formal channels. Response times vary depending on the nature of the request and institutional capacity. Mental health services are present in the system. In supermax settings, these services are often delivered at the cell front. Interaction occurs through the door. Privacy is limited. The structure of the routine does not change based on individual preference. It is applied uniformly. Adjustments are made only through formal processes. Requests, reviews, approvals. Each step requires time. The result is a daily experience defined by repetition. Not as an incidental feature but as a central condition. The routine does not accelerate. It does not pause. It continues. Hour by hour. Day by day. The environment remains constant. The procedures remain consistent. And within that structure, time is not marked by what happens, but by how often the same things happen again. The day ends in the same place it began. Inside the same walls. Under the same light. With the same sequence waiting to begin again. For some individuals, confinement in a supermax unit does not last indefinitely. There is an endpoint. It may come through administrative decision. It may come through the completion of a sentence. Or it may come through transfer to another facility. The process of leaving is structured much like the process of entry. Records are reviewed. Clearances are issued. Movement is scheduled. The individual is prepared for transition. In federal facilities, release from custody follows established procedures. Property is returned in accordance with institutional rules. Documentation is completed. Identification is verified. These steps are administrative, but they mark a significant shift. After extended periods in isolation, the change in environment is immediate. The physical boundaries expand. The range of movement increases. But adjustment is not procedural. It is not governed by a checklist. Research and documented accounts indicate that individuals who have spent prolonged periods in solitary confinement may experience difficulty adapting to less restrictive environments. This has been examined in both academic studies and legal proceedings. Observed effects can include heightened sensitivity to noise, discomfort in larger spaces, and challenges with social interaction. These observations are not uniform. They vary by individual, by duration of confinement, and by prior mental health conditions. Some individuals transition gradually within the prison system before release. They move from highly restrictive units to less controlled settings. This step-down process is designed to reintroduce interaction and reduce the abruptness of change. According to Bureau of Prisons policies, such programs include increased out-of-cell time and limited contact with others under supervision. The effectiveness of these programs has been evaluated in internal reports and external studies, with mixed findings. For those released directly to the outside community, the transition is more immediate. The structure that defined daily life is no longer present. There are no scheduled counts, no controlled movement, no enforced routine. The absence of these elements can create uncertainty. Re-entry into society involves additional processes. Supervised release conditions may be imposed. These can include regular reporting to probation officers, restrictions on movement, and participation in specific programs. These conditions are outlined at sentencing and enforced after release. Support services vary. Some individuals have access to re-entry programs that provide assistance with housing, employment, and counseling. Others rely on personal networks or limited public resources. The availability and quality of support can influence outcomes, but they are not consistent across jurisdictions. The long-term effects of extended isolation remain an area of ongoing study. Psychological assessments conducted after release have documented persistent symptoms in some cases. These include anxiety, difficulty concentrating, and challenges with social reintegration. Other individuals demonstrate adaptation over time. There is no single pattern. The variability reflects the complexity of the experience. Legal and policy debates continue. Advocates, researchers, and correctional officials have raised questions about the role and duration of solitary confinement. Some jurisdictions have implemented reforms. These include limits on the length of isolation and expanded oversight mechanisms. At the federal level, policy adjustments have been made in response to litigation and internal review. These changes address specific aspects of confinement, such as mental health care and review procedures. The core structure, however, remains in place. Supermax facilities continue to operate. Classification systems continue to assign individuals to them. The use of isolation persists as a tool of institutional management. For those who have experienced it, the effects do not end at the door. They extend beyond the period of confinement, into subsequent placements, into re-entry, into daily life outside the institution. The transition is recorded in documents, release dates, transfer orders, completion of sentence. These are measurable points, but the adjustment that follows is less easily defined. It unfolds over time, in environments that are no longer controlled in the same way, in spaces that are larger, less predictable, and more complex. The structure that once governed every hour is absent. In its place is variability, choice, and the responsibility that comes with it. For the institution, the process concludes with release. Files are closed. Records are archived. The system moves on to the next case. For the individual, the experience remains part of a continuous timeline, not separated by walls or doors, but carried forward, as documented history, as lived reality, and as a record of time spent in a place where movement was limited, interaction was controlled, and each day followed the same pattern until it did not. The door opens. The procedure is completed. And beyond it, there is no longer a schedule waiting to begin again.